Hi, welcome back again to another episode here today. Today I want to talk about juggling, riding a unicycle, talking, and listening. And uh, this occurred to me this morning as I was in my exercise class, thinking about our program and how it all works. And so let me try and explain this. So I remember when I first was going through divorce, someone had recommended a book to me called Crazy Time by Abigail Traffer, I believe is her name. And so I remember reading it because the title sounds really good. In other words, it's about how difficult divorce is at the time and how to survive it. It's not that. In fact, what it is was very depressing. In fact, because what she does is she goes through and she talks about all of the things that why relationships fail. There's so many ways that relationships can fail, and it's just difficult and it's hard to do, and it's impossible to not have them fail. And I think she was doing it in a way to try and make us feel better that there's so many ways that relationships go downhill. And of course, divorce is an obvious conclusion when you see things that like this that don't work out. So, but I read this book and I was like, this is not what I need. I don't need someone to tell me all the ways that relationships fail because guess what? At some point, I want to be in another relationship. And I really felt bad. Like, what's the point? I guess I'll just plan to be alone and single for the rest of my life. And so I don't recommend the book, but it is out there. And she does have some interesting stories in it. Now, why I bring this up is because I'm going to talk today about riding a unicycle, juggling, and listening and talking all at the same time. And it sounds impossible. It sounds like what Abigail Traffer did, in that it sounds like who could ever do this? But I want to walk you through the process here of what I see for people as they go through the divorce process and how this works and how you can actually do it in a way that works. So let's start with the first one of riding a unicycle. So very few people know how to ride a unicycle, and I am one of those that does know how. But I didn't do it out of some, weird desire. I remember in gym class in high school that there was a bunch of different things that they put out for us and said, do something different than what you normally do. And I remember looking at the unicycle thing and I'll try this, but there is no way I'm going to be able to do this. Well, I remember they put out the unicycles and I remember jumping on, and of course it was hard at first. But what was surprising was, I mean, it literally is like riding a bike, only a little bit harder, but not much. And I remember getting on this thing and I loved it so much because you had to be really in tune and paying attention to what was happening with the unicycle. So if the unicycle wanted to go to the right or you started falling that way, you just have to go that way. You can't correct, you can't adjust a whole lot other than go with what it wants to do. And I got to the point where I really enjoyed riding a unicycle um, because of that, like intense ability to just sort of go with what was happening. Um, so my analogy for what we do for the divorce process is the place that we start in our programs, which is around your thinking. And I think it's very similar to this idea. It's so common that people are struggling with all of this stuff going through their head. There's so many thoughts and judgments and, you know, things that we think about ourselves and we think about our ex and we think about, we worry about our kids and, you know, what are other people going to think or what are they going to say? And it's so hard to do that stuff. So I use the unicycle analogy because that's how I felt when I was going through divorce. Was it felt like this is impossible to do. Just like I thought it was impossible to ride a unicycle. I didn't think I was going to be something that I would enjoy. It's just that when I finally got on, and started doing it, it was like, wow, this is kind of cool and it's different and it works. And it's, it was so surprising. I see the same thing with people's thinking, that it is possible. It sounds daunting to somehow be able to manage all of these really difficult thoughts and these things going through our heads and wondering what's the next step and how do I do this, and just the worry and the anxiety and all of those things, those come up for people. But I see over and over again that when you go through this process and you do the right steps, you can get through this stuff and you start to gain hold of those thoughts that have been so terrifying. Just the other day, we do a support group on Tuesday nights, and there was a guy he's in the ninth week of the class, and just 10 weeks ago, before he started the class, he came to the support group, and he he was like practically vibrating. He was having such a hard time. He was anxious. He was sad. He was in so much pain. And last night, or not last night, it was a couple nights ago, he was in the class and he was so calm and positive and excited about moving forward and about how good his relationship as he was divorcing was with his ex. So the shift is dramatic when you learn tools on how to do this, how to think well. And we've been doing some things. We always spent a lot of time talking about mindset and some other things and about our the habits we have of our thoughts and all of these things. And lately we've added another thing, which is looking at interrogating those thoughts in a different way. And it's all such cool stuff that it gives people the ability to control their thoughts like you can control a unicycle. It is possible and it sounds impossible when you're in the middle of it. And yet when you see how to do it, you start going, wow, this is so cool. Okay, so that's step one, learning how to manage your thinking. Now, the next idea that I wanted to share with you is the idea of juggling. So juggling is the same thing, right? It sounds impossible to a lot of people. I still can't juggle, so I'm not going to tell you I can do that well. But I think of juggling as this thing where when I've done it, and I've practiced before, where when I'm juggling, I see, it's sort of like your attention goes to what's the next ball, what's the next ball, and your hands are doing, have to be very consistent and repetitive, and you just follow emotion. And when you figure out how to do this, as long as you can sort of quickly adjust your focus to what that next ball is and where it is and making sure you're catching it and then throwing it again, it's very possible to do. So this is, for me, the next step in the process is the riding a unicycle is one thing, but learning to juggle is another thing. It's completely different. But our feelings, our emotions are similar to this in that they are constantly coming at us, especially in divorce. Those emotions can people go from happy to sad to angry to anxious to confused so quickly because there's just so much going on. It's like the juggling. It's these balls going around and around and around. And at first it feels like I can't hold these. I keep dropping these things. I break down. I can't do this. Similar to learning to ride a unicycle, part of what we do is we help people we go step by step. All right, focus on just trying to manage one ball. Just do one thing. Just try and handle that one and learn how to throw that consistently. Catch it, throw it, catch it, throw it, catch it, throw it. Now let's add a second one. Catch those two and throw it. You got two hands, two balls. Very doable. Then you start seeing the other balls coming in. Harder for sure. It gets overwhelming. But the goal is not to see how many balls you can juggle. It's to learn to manage the big ones and let the other ones fall away. So in our programs, we focus primarily on grief and anger. But there's other ones, shame, confusion, anxiety, all of those things. Those are easier to deal with when you deal with the main ones, the grief and anger. They go from being kind of like bowling balls down to tennis balls that you're juggling. They do get easier. They do get more manageable as you go through this process. So take that. Now we've talked about the unicycle and juggling. Now what happens when you add these two things together? It's a lot harder, right? but it's not impossible. In fact, this is like the circus act when you go to see buskers on the street somewhere. They're riding a unicycle and juggling at the same time. It seems impossible, and yet they've been able to do it. So in the same way, what I find is that when people go through the process, that when you first just start with your thinking, when you start to learn tools and skills that can manage that, it isn't so daunting to then say, okay, now let's add juggling to this if you also know how to juggle. Yes, it's another layer to this, and it's not as hard as it seems. When you get good at one, then you can add another one. Now, this brings up another point for me that I remember hearing years ago about Elon Musk, something that his wife said about him, the wife at the time. Um, and I know some people love him, some people hate him. So one of the things that she said was people asked, somebody in the audience had asked her, how can I be like Elon? How can I do all of these different things? And she said very simply, first, learn one thing. So she talked the story about how the first thing he did was he went to engineering school. He learned how to be a good engineer. He had to learn how to do this, and he had to really get it down. And he was very good at it. Then what he did was then he added the skill of business. Then he learned how to become a businessman. He didn't do them both at the same time. He focused on one thing first and then on the next thing. So that's the same thing that I see in our program is focus on one thing. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You could focus on the feelings first, but what we find is it's much easier if you focus on managing your thoughts first. And I say this as people all the time come to us and say, I can't think, I'm thinking all night, I can't sleep, I'm not eating well. It's because their thoughts are causing so much suffering. There's so much confusion. It's hard to focus when you're not getting much sleep. It's hard to have focus when you're not eating well. So that's why we start with your thinking. And then the second part is managing those feelings. This is where it gets really big, is that when you can do those two together, people will look at you and say, oh my gosh, how do you do this? How are you doing so well, so fast? Why? Because I first learned how to ride a unicycle, and then I learned how to juggle. Okay, so those are the first two skills. Now, the next thing I want to talk about was just the basic idea of talking. So we're all good at talking. We all can say things to other people. But what we find here is this skill, this ability to share yourself honestly, openly, authentically, without hiding behind a mask, without trying to, um, you know, without being honest about what's really going on for you, is actually really hard for a lot of people. Self-worth is a major issue for a lot of people. Um, so learning this skill of learning to know who you are and being able to communicate that, to say that to other people is so powerful. Now, let's take that skill of learning to communicate, to share yourself with others. You can do that while you're riding the unicycle, while you're juggling, and you can talk. Again, this is a skill that we see people do as buskers on the street, right? They're able to do all these things. Huge. Now, it sounds impossible. It sounds like there's no way. But what we find is that when you do this, when you're really able to share yourself and be this person that's so capable of doing these three things, you move into this stage where things start to really work. You feel like you're really got a hold of life in a better way. And again, in a lot of ways, what we see is that people don't do this normally ever. Until you go through divorce, you don't have a reason to confront these things. Divorce somehow brings out the challenge that none of us want to face, and yet we're required to. The fourth skill, the fourth step in the process is listening. Now, why I want to bring this up is that it is possible, if we just go to our skills, it is possible to ride a unicycle, juggle, ask somebody a question, and hear their response and listen to what they have to say. This is the fourth stage in the process of being able to really hear other people. And I have someone close to me that has her ex-husband is very, very angry all the time. And he just says and sort of says whatever he wants to say, regardless of the effect that it has. He's rude, he's disrespectful, he's not very thoughtful. And in some ways, it is because he's hurting so much. He has never learned these skills and he hasn't taken the time to do it. So, what we find is that what I see is that learning how to listen to someone like him who is so kind of aggressive takes a certain skill as well. To be able to observe in other people, look at how they're thinking, look at how they are feeling, what's going on inside of them, look at how they are communicating and not take it personally is a whole nother step. And why this is so significant is because this is what happens in relationships. So many times we lose ourselves in these relationships without knowing who we really are. So the skill is being able to observe someone that you care about in a way that says you are your own person. You are responsible for your thoughts, your feelings, and how you communicate. But it's not mine to own. It's yours. So um, these four skills, when you combine them all together, it sounds impossible. It sounds so hard when you hear about it. It sounds like the book Crazy Time. And yet, it really isn't if you just focus on one thing at a time, take it step by step. And, I see this over and over again as the people go through our programs. What they're doing is they are learning all of these tools along the way, and they start learning how to do these four skills in a way that gives them empowerment, to allows them to feel like they finally got life under control in a way that they never have before. This program is life changing. It makes a difference for people for the rest of their life because there are so many things that they learn out of this, tools that you're going to use every day. So if this is something that's interesting to you, I encourage you, go to rebuilders.net, look up what we do, look for a program that works for you, for your schedule, for your budget, and don't let this be something that you're stuck with because you think there's no way I can ride a unicycle, juggle, talk, and listen. It is possible, and we see it happen all the time. So I look forward to seeing you on the other side. See you soon. Bye bye.